So if you do not know me, I am Miss Nelson. I teach sophomore English, I teach ACT prep, I'm the ACT prep lead for this school. And as you guys all know, you are taking your ACT on Thursday. My people coming in and you'll just sit every other seat. Raise your hand if this is your first ACT. Okay, that's good. You will be taking the ACT on Thursday, and then you will take it again as a senior your first semester, okay? So what we're here to do today is just go over some basic strategies, some tips and tricks, and just to kind of introduce you to the test. For a lot of you, this is the first time you've seen it. And if we can prepare you a little bit for what you're going to see or what you're going to have to do, then we definitely want to do that and help make you a little more comfortable. So, very quickly, I want to talk about why we care about the ACT, why this is a thing that we spend so much time on and make you guys do. The very first reason is, of course, that you need it to graduate. It is a state law that you have to take the ACT to graduate high school. So there's that. You don't have to get a certain score on it to graduate, but you do have to take it. After that, we like the ACT because it gets you into college. You have to have the ACT to go to school. Even many trade schools have programs where you need certain ACT scores to get into those programs. And so that is, of course, the next reason. Many of you are not going to college. What I would say to that is, that's fine. If you have a plan, go be a productive citizen and do what you want to do. That's absolutely great. But don't limit yourself. 19 or 20 or 21-year-old you doesn't want to be stuck because 15-year-old you decided that you didn't want to take the ACT seriously. So just give yourself opportunities. That's what I'm going to say to that. And then finally, we'll talk about this. So with college, what some people don't realize is, yes, you need to have a score to get into school, but a lot of colleges actually offer or require learning support classes. These are lower level like English and math classes that you have to take before you can begin taking your degree requirements. And you can test out of those classes with your ACT score. So if you're trying to get through college as quickly as possible, these are probably classes that you want to be able to skip. For some people, they may be really great. Having that extra foundation in English or math could be really good for you. But if that's something that you're not interested in, most schools have these classes and you get out of them with your ACT score. So this is from Motlow. To get out of the English learning support class at Motlow, you have to have an 18 at least in English on your ACT. And for the learning support math classes, you have to have either a 26 composite overall or a 19 or higher on the math test. If you're looking to go somewhere other than Motlow, I would just encourage you to really research your school, look at their website, see what requirements they have. Okay, so beyond college, the biggest reason that we care about the ACT, the biggest reason I care about it is because of money. I want you guys to get as much money to go to school as possible, okay? And this is coming from somebody who finished school with quite a bit of student debt. If we can avoid that for you, I want to help you do that, okay? So many of your academic scholarships are ACT dependent. The Hope Scholarship is a 21 requirement on your ACT or a 3.0 GPA. And of course the Hope is accepted at most, if not all, public universities in the state and even some of the private ones. But even beyond that, many schools have what are called guaranteed scholarships. These are scholarships where you don't have to do anything other than just apply to the school and be accepted. And then your ACT qualifies you for these. You are just guaranteed to get these scholarships. At MTSU, a score of 23 guarantees you $2,000 extra a year, up to a score of 30 with $5,000 a year. Okay? That's not a little bit of money. Tennessee Tech offers more levels, but their requirements are a little higher. We're starting with $3,000 a year with a 27 and up to $5,000 with a 33 or higher. And then UTK actually offers up to $8,000 a year with a 34 and higher. Okay? So what I would recommend is have an idea of what you want to do or what you might be interested in doing after high school, what schools you might be looking at. Go ahead and start looking at their websites and knowing what their requirements are so that you can go into this ACT with the knowledge of what you need, and also your senior year, so you know if you need an increase or if you need to really focus in on one area or something. Okay, so what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about some strategies and tips and tricks. But before I do that, I want to talk about the mindset of going into the ACT. Because this test is so different than any other test you've taken your entire school career, okay? So in math class, when I am given a math test that has 20 questions on it, the goal for most of us, if not all of us, is to get all 20 questions correct within the class period. Because I want a 100, right? I want the highest grade possible because I want it to score into my grade, right? But that's not the case with the ACT. Most of us, I would argue, don't want the 100% on the ACT, right? Most of us, a nice solid 21 is gonna work for what we need, okay? Many of us may be living somewhere between the 20s and up to like 24, 26, somewhere in there. Some of us are shooting a lot higher, okay? But the way that we approach this test is so different, okay? So what I hear from a lot of students is things like the reading test was too fast. I ran out of time. It was too much to read. And I'll ask students, okay, where are you wanting to go to school? I'll say Motlow, which is great. Motlow's a great school. But you don't need a 36 to go to Motlow. You don't need a 36 to get Motlow paid for, okay? So why are you rushing through a test and not doing well on the questions and you're so worried about getting done, when if I look at my score chart right here, to get a 21 on the ACT, I need just about 23 questions on the reading test. That's out of 40. That's just over half of the test. On the math test, to get a 21, out of 60 questions, I only need 30. That's only half the test, okay? So why are we trying to rush through this test to get it done instead of focusing on getting the questions right that we need? Now, if I'm trying to get a 34, 35, 36, yes, timing is something I need to be worried about, okay? But if I'm trying to live in the 21 to 24 range, that's not what I'm doing, okay? So going into this test, I want you to have that mindset. You don't have to get questions done. You have to get questions done right, okay? And that's where we're gonna spend our energy, not rushing through the test to get it done, but focusing on getting the questions right that we need to get right. Because what you need might be very different than the person sitting next to you, okay? Does that make sense? Okay. All right, so I'm gonna walk you through each bit of the test. You guys should have taken your pre-ACT as sophomores. Excuse me. My understanding is that that looks very similar to the ACT, so hopefully a lot of this is not brand new information to you. But the first test that you're gonna get is the English test. It is 45 minutes. It is 75 questions. That's 5 passages with 15 questions each. If I'm worried about timing, that breaks down to 9 minutes per passage with 15 questions, okay? If I'm not worried about timing, but then it doesn't. Okay. You're going to be tested in 2 areas on the English test, grammar and rhetoric. So grammar is going to be your basic English class rules, right? Your commas, your subject-verb agreement, pronoun antecedent stuff, all that sort of things. And then you're going to be asked bigger idea questions, your rhetoric questions. Things like, if the author were to insert this sentence, where would it go? Or if they were trying to achieve this purpose, did they do it? Why or why not? Okay? So 2 different types of questions that you're going to see. The grammar questions that you're going to see on this test, the way that they're formatted is you're going to read a passage and there will be underlined sections. Each underlined section will have a number under it and it corresponds to the number out to the side. And there's not even really a question, it's just 4 choices. Okay? And they're asking you to choose the best replacement for the underlined portion. One of the options will be no change and the other 3 options you can decide between. So that's what we're looking at as far as the grammar goes. The other questions will be actual legitimate questions that they're asking you. So be expecting that. The strategy on the English test, it's very straightforward. You start at the beginning and you do the test in order. That's not really the strategy that I recommend for any of the other tests. But what you're going to do is begin reading, and you're going to read until the end of a sentence that has an underlined portion. What you need to know about these test makers is that they have spent a lot of time and a lot of years making these ACT tests. And they know how teenagers' brains work. And they know that many of us, when we see the underlined portion, we're stopping right there and we're answering the question and we're not reading to the end of the sentence. Okay? So we're gonna read to the end of the sentence, because if I'm a test maker and I know teens are doing that, I'm gonna put important information after the underlined part, okay? We're also not skipping lines. You may have sentences that don't have anything underlined. You're still gonna read those because you need the context, or because one of the bigger idea questions is gonna come back and be about that section, okay? So you answer your question, read to the end of the sentence, answer it, and then you're gonna move on and you just keep going. We're reading everything, we're answering questions, that's it. Okay, so the English passages, they are not incredibly complex passages. They're fairly easy, straightforward. I'm not going to go so far as to say they're enjoyable, but they're not super high-level, complex passages. So we're not reading these for analysis. We are reading these for grammar and for understanding, okay? You do not need to be spending time trying to memorize these passages or reading them super in-depth. We just want to be able to answer grammar questions about them and maybe some basic organization questions. If you can, when you get an underlined portion, if you can identify what the error is, or even go ahead and solve it, then go ahead and do that. That's just going to make your life a whole lot easier, okay? If you can eliminate some answer choices, it's going to make your life easier. They're just your basic test-taking skills that you guys have been doing for years. If you can't answer the question, if it is just confusing or it does not make sense what is being said, read this sentence that follows. Go back and read the sentence before. A lot of times they're putting context in these sentences, not expecting you to go and look for it. All right, we are choosing the best answer for these questions, okay? And a lot of times that can be the most grammatically correct answer. But a lot of times it's not. Sometimes you will get an answer or a question where all four answer choices are grammatically correct. So it's not about the grammar. It might be about the wordiness of the question, or it might be about whether it makes sense in context. So it's not just, is it grammatically correct, but you also need to be looking for, does it make sense? And is it concise? The ACT really likes conciseness, right? They don't like wordiness. So if you see four answer choices, and they're all saying the same thing, but maybe some are fancier than the other ones, or saying it in more words, then you're going to be looking for the most concise answer, okay? If it sounds fanciest, it's probably the wrong answer, okay? Once you're finished with the passage, do not plan to come back to that passage. We do not bank on extra time with the ACT. Extra time is a gift from God, but we do not plan for it. Okay? So if I'm doing passage 1 and there's a question that I'm not entirely sure about and I want to come back and revisit it later, you revisit it before you move on from that passage. Okay? Because what's going to happen is you go read passage 2, you read passage 3, and oh, I have a question, let me go see if I can do it now. And you go back to passage 1 and you've forgotten everything you read, you don't know what's happening in context, you now have to reread extra to figure out, wait, what's going on, what is this talking about? And then you still have other passages to finish. It takes a lot of time. So while you're in that passage, revisit any questions you need to revisit, choose answers that you can live with, and then just keep going with the test, okay? At 5 minutes, when your proctor says you have 5 minutes remaining, that's when I want you to go through and put in an answer for every blank question. So even questions you've not seen yet. So just pick a default answer, you're just gonna go B, 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 B. Or A or C or D. That way they are at least answered. Then go back to where you were working and you keep working until they call time. Then you don't have to worry about blank answers because a blank answer is a wrong answer. Okay? And then everything is filled, and if you get to them, you get to them. If not, at least you have a chance. Okay? If you get done and you have extra time, then go back and check whatever you need to. Do a triple check. That's absolutely fine, but we're not counting on having extra time. Okay? Okay, just a couple tips. When they give you long, clunky, awkward sentences and there's an error or something, go back to the basics. See if you can start by identifying just the subject and the verb. See if they match. If they don't, well, cool, there's your error. If they do match, well, then just start adding pieces back in until you can figure out what the answer is. They're going to do things like separate your subject and verb. They're going to throw some prepositional phrases in there to mess with you. So just be watching for those things. Like I said, know that they're trying to shake you up. Sometimes even things like the way that they format the questions can sometimes leave like really big chunks of space between lines and in the middle of a sentence, and even that can sometimes throw you, just making it difficult to read. Commas, when in doubt, take it out. That is not a grammatical rule, but conciseness applies to punctuation as well, and what I've learned is that teenagers like to throw commas out like they're confetti. Don't do that, okay? If you aren't sure about a comma rule, take the comma out. It's not gonna work every time, but it'll work a lot of the time. If delete or omit is an option, it says 96% of the time this is the right choice. I did make that number up. However, I did not make up the fact that the last ACT I was able to look at, there were 6 questions on that test, which I've never seen that many, but there were 6 that had delete or omit as an option, and out of those 6, 4 times it was the correct answer. So 66% of the time it is going to be the right answer. They're not typically wasting delete or omit as an answer choice. So they're not throwing it in as a distractor. So if you see it, don't ignore it, right? That also being said, no change is just as likely to be the right answer as any of the other ones. It literally 1/4 of the time, it's no change. So I have students that'll tell me, I don't like choosing no change. I think it feels weird or it's not gonna be the right answer. No, it's literally just the answer that's in the passage. It's just as likely to be the right answer. Okay, we're gonna skip these real quick. I wanna make sure I get to all the other tests. If I have time, I'll come back to it. I know you guys are super bummed about not going through pronoun usage, but we might get there. Okay, so the math test. It is the second test. It is the longest test. It is 60 minutes and it is 60 questions. I have up here that it's a minute per question, but I don't even really like telling you guys that. I really do need to delete it off this slide because the way that the test is organized is easy to hard, very generically speaking. And so my questions on the front end of this test may only take me a few seconds. And then questions on the back end of the test may take me multiple minutes, okay? So don't think, oh, I've got a minute per question, because it's not really how it's working. So like I said, the test is organized very generically, easy to hard. You're gonna see pre-algebra and elementary algebra, some algebra and geometry, some trig, I've seen some stats, I've seen pre-cal, maybe even a little bit of calculus. Here's the thing with that. So number one, it gets easier to hard because of the content, okay? But it also could be more difficult as the test goes on because they're asking you more elementary algebra questions, but maybe in a more difficult way or in a more confusing way, or they're asking you to do more steps. So just because the test is getting more difficult doesn't mean you can't do that, okay? That being said, if you have never had a stats class or a pre-cal class or a trig class, this is where that kind of rushing to get through the test comes in, because if I've never had those classes, I'm not getting those questions, right? I put myself in that boat. Like if you hand me a French test, I'm failing that sucker because I've never taken French, right? If you've never taken pre-cal, you're probably not gonna be able to do a whole lot of pre-cal, okay? So I want you banking your time for the questions that you know how to do so that you can really make sure that you are getting those questions correct, okay? So the best math test strategy that I can give you is just to do math. Okay? There is no replacement for not being able to do math. You know yourself, you know where your strengths and weaknesses are, you know what your math history is. If you are wanting to raise your math score and do well on this test, what I would really encourage you to do is practice those skills that you know you need practice with. We have the online ACT accounts that you've been doing in homeroom. You should be able to access that at home as well. And I'm just a really big fan of YouTube for ACT prep. If you go to YouTube and type in like ACT slope intercept or ACT circles or math tips ACT, you're gonna find just boo-boos of videos, okay? Because I mean, there's people who this is their actual job is to create this content for you, okay? There's some really, really good stuff out there. So actively seek that out. And you could really do a lot to raise your score. Okay, so the test strategy for the math test is a little different. I like to do 2 run-throughs of the math test, okay? The first time that I'm doing this, I'm going through and I'm doing 2 things. I'm answering questions that I know I can do now, so my now questions. These are questions where I know the math, I understand what it's asking me, I know how to do it, I can get it right, so I'm gonna do it. And then I'm also going to do never questions. These are questions that, but by the grace of God, I'm not getting, because it's a math that I've never seen before, okay? You're gonna choose a default answer, it doesn't matter which one, and you're just gonna stick with that. So anytime you go to a question and you say, okay, I have never seen this before, this is from a math class I've not had, then you're gonna pick your default answer. So as you've gone through and done that, answer questions that you know how to do and answer questions that you have no clue how to do. What you're gonna have left are what we call our later questions. And these are gonna be questions that you maybe can mess around with and figure something out, or maybe you can eliminate some answer choices. Maybe you recognize what it's asking you to do, but you don't quite remember how to do it. Things like that. Okay? What I do like about the online program that you guys are going to be using to test is, unless they changed it, you'll have a drop-down menu and you'll just be able to see check marks next to every question that you've done. And so you should very easily be able to look and see, oh, these are the questions I've not done. Okay? So what you've done is gone through and quickly answered the questions that come easily to you and answer the questions that you don't know how to do. So what you're left with is an exact number of here are the questions that I have left that I'm gonna have to kind of struggle with. So now you have a better idea of how to use your time. Because if I'm just trying to do every single question, you don't know exactly how many never questions are coming or what you're gonna be faced with. But if you do that first run through, then you take the rest of your time and you can allocate it toward what you've got left, okay? All right, so like I said, there's no replacement for not being able to do math. However, there are some things that we can do to help make your life a little easier. So I'm gonna run through some math question strategies. The first thing I've got is just to solve it. Sometimes there is not a better answer or a better strategy than just doing the math, okay? So I might get a question like this, where they say, okay, if f of x is this, then f of 1 is like, there is nothing easier to do here than just to plug 1 in for x, okay? So if I look at this, I'm gonna talk about it later too, but remember your PEMDAS, is that what we call them? Your order of operations? Okay, refresh yourself on those because you will be tested on those. Okay, if I take this 1 and I plug it in for x, what's 3 times 1? 3 plus 7, quantity squared, 100, there you go. It took us 2 seconds and it was a group effort, so good job. Okay, sometimes just solving is the best. Sometimes what we can do though is make problems a little easier for ourselves by plugging in numbers to make things easier to work with, okay? So I've got this expression right here. Now this is a very basic example, so some of my people may be sitting here going, oh, I can do that, no problem. Cool, do that, that's fine. But just to prove my point here, okay? So what I could do is I can multiply everything here by 1/2 y squared, but I don't want to do that because that doesn't sound fun. And then I'm gonna have to combine all these like terms, I'm gonna have to reduce, I don't wanna do that, okay? So what I'm gonna do is make this easier on myself. And I'm gonna plug in numbers to make my variables easier to work with. Anytime I'm plugging in numbers, you wanna choose numbers that are nice and solid and round. Don't be picking like a 7.3 to plug in here, okay? That's just crazy. Okay, so I'm not gonna plug in a 0. Why? What happens if I plug in a 0 right here? It's gonna make this whole thing 0, and then I plug in zeros here, and it's gonna make all of these 0, right? So it's not gonna work well. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna plug in 1 for x and 1 for y. And when I do that, essentially I'm just getting rid of my variables and I'm left with my coefficients. And then it's just basic math. So if I get rid of my variables, I have 6 plus 2 is, say it louder, it wasn't a trick question. 8 plus 12, 20 minus 2, times 1/2, 9. So now I just have to figure out, okay, which of these answers also give me 9 when I get rid of my variables? Well, what's 9 times 1 times 1? 9. Do I stop there? Is that my right answer? I mean, it is, but I'm not stopping there. I'm gonna go and double check to make sure that none of these just coincidentally give me 9. If they do, then I'm gonna go in here and like, oh, I'm gonna plug in 2 for y and 1 for x and do it again. Okay? But that can sometimes make these a little easier to work with, is plugging in those numbers. Does that make sense? It is A, is the correct answer, so good job. Okay, instead of plugging in numbers from my own brain, sometimes what I can do is plug in the answers to help me. So here I have an artist who is making this much money from selling some paintings. They want to know what is the fewest number they can sell to make at least 60,000. So, again, I'm an English teacher, y'all, so I can do a lot of this math. I can't do all this math. I assume what I could do is to maybe set up some kind of inequality thing and do to factor. I don't know. I don't want to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my answer choices and I'm just going to plug them in and see which one gets me to at least 60,000. What's the smallest number that'll get me there? Now, what do you notice about the way these answers are organized? Yeah, they're lowest to highest, okay? So when I start plugging in numbers, where am I starting? In the middle. I'm going to start in the middle. Because if I stick 200 in, and it gives me 50,000, well, I've not only eliminated 200, I've also eliminated these two, right? So now I've only got 2 left. Now, if I put 200 in, and I plug it in, and it gives me 65,000, am I done? That got me to at least 60,000. No, but I want to double check to make sure this one's not going to get me closer, because they want the least number of paintings. If I did the math, I won't make y'all do it right now. But if I did, 200 gets me exactly 60,000, so it's 200. Questions about that? Okay. All right, draw a picture and measure. Now, drawing a picture, that can also just mean showing your work. You will have scrap paper. They're not taking, they might take it up, but they're not like grading it or anything. Please write everything out because you can catch your mistakes that way. Okay? If you're just doing everything in the calculator and then you clear it out or whatever, and you realize, oh, I did something wrong, but I don't know what I did, you can't see what you've done. So write it out. Also, there are a lot of people on this test who are taking walks or painting fences or painting rooms or planting gardens. There's all sorts of like geometric word problems on this test, okay? So when they give you a word problem like that, draw it out. Here I've got my guy and he's walking east and north and east and north. They want to know if he just walks straight, how much time would he save or how much distance would he save? If I draw it out, what I learn is that I actually have 2 triangles and then I label everything and like, oh, now I need to find my hypotenuse. And I can do that, right? But if I'm just reading this and trying to solve it in my brain, I might not catch that, okay? Questions about this? Okay. All right, don't underestimate the use of logic on these tests. I know over the years you have had to learn and memorize laws and theorems and rules and all sorts of things. For the most part, math is a fairly logical subject, okay? So don't underestimate the use of just common sense and logic. So here, this question is asking me to find this angle, okay? Well, in this triangle, I only have one angle given. But, oh, look, these 2 match. It makes sense that these 2 are going to match, which means these 2 probably match. Like, I'm just using common sense. There's rules that prove that. I don't know what they are, English teacher. But it makes sense, okay? It also makes sense that if I can find this angle, then I can find this one. I know that triangles are 180 degrees, but if for some reason you've forgotten that, I know that a square is 4 90s, and I can do 90 times 4 on my calculator, and I know that a triangle is half a square, so that's going to get me to 180. So just don't underestimate the use of logic and the use of common sense, okay? Questions about that? Okay. All right, and then finally, figure out what the question is actually asking you to do. I sat down when this question was released on a practice test, I sat down to do it one night, and because that's how exciting my life is that I'm doing ACT math on Friday night. But I sat down to read this, and I said, for a given set of data, the standard score, and my brain went, nope. Okay? I'm not a math person. These words make my brain shut down. I have never seen half these symbols before. I don't know what they are. So I just skipped over it. But when I came back, and I went through all the muddiness, this right here, look, they're telling me what each of these symbols is, and then they're just wanting me to solve. It's a solve for X. But they know that my brain was going to shut it down and say, not happening. And that's exactly what I did. They're giving me all of this muddiness to see if I can get through it, to understand that, oh, it's just asking me to solve for X, and it's a very easy solve for X. Okay? So don't shut down. Read through the actual question. Try to figure out what is it actually asking you to do, because they will give you extra information that you don't need, and you do have to sometimes decide if you're going to use it all or not. And it makes it a lot easier if you're not using everything they give you. Okay, pay attention units of measurement. They will sometimes have these questions where, like, the guy who's painting the room or building the fence or whatever, and they'll have 3 or 4 questions about that diagram or about that word problem. And they will say something like, this is a scale drawing given in inches. And then like 3 questions later, it'll ask you, how much tile does he need for this room in feet? And I will miss it every single time. They even italicize it. And I will miss it every single time. So be better than me and don't miss it. Pay attention to the units of measurement. Don't forget your PEMDAS. And then finally, like I said, the best strategy for math is really just identify your weaknesses, know where you need practice, and then go do that. Okay? Questions about math before we move on? Okay. Okay. All right, so the reading test is the 3rd test. You get a 10 or 15 minute break, you'll get a snack, you'll get to stretch, go to the bathroom, and then you're going to come back and do the 2 shortest tests. The reading test is 35 minutes. It is 4 passages of 10 questions each. That breaks down to 8 minutes and 45 seconds per passage and 10 questions. If I am not worried about timing, because I'm not shooting for a 36, then I'm not so worried about the 8:45. The reading test, more so than any of the other ones, I feel is really pushing it for time. It's high-level passages. 8:45 for a passage and 10 questions is not a lot of time, okay? So go in having an idea of what score you want and having an idea of how many questions that means you have to get correct, okay? Because hopefully that will take some of that timing pressure off of you. All right, you're going to get 4 passages, and they will be given to you in this order. You'll have a literary narrative, you'll have a social science passage, which is going to be like geography or psychology or sociology. You'll have humanities, which is going to be like arts or music or things like that. And then natural science. I have read a lot about dinosaurs on the ACT. I have read a lot about insects. I've read a lot about space. So that's kind of going to be the natural science area. This is important because you don't have to do these passages in this order, okay? If you are like me and reading about dinosaurs on the ACT makes you want to go to sleep, well, let's not do that one first. Okay, let's say that one for the last. If you are the opposite of me and reading a literary narrative makes you want to pull your hair out, okay, we'll skip that one. We'll come back to it, okay? Take your time and work on the other passages that are going to be easier for you or more engaging. That's relative. They're not exciting passages, but do the ones that are going to be easier for you. Now, the last several tests that I've seen, they have actually labeled these passages as informational text. You'll have literary narrative, and you'll have informational text, informational text, informational text. But they are still under these topics. They're just not labeling them like that, okay? So know that if you go in and you open up the test and the first passage you look at it and go, nope, you can skip it and come back to it and start with one of the other passages, okay? If that works better for you. Okay, so a few things to note. One passage will most likely be divided into A and B passages. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. One passage could include a graph or a visual. This was a statement that the ACT company put out several years ago. I've seen one ACT have a reading test with a graph or a table. I've not seen it since, but that statement is still out there, so I just wanted to say it so that you guys aren't completely shocked if you open up the reading test and, oh, there's a graph. Okay? I will be surprised if you see that, but they also don't call me and tell me what's going to be on the ACT, so they should, but they don't. So, you're going to be asked 2 types of questions. You're going to be asked detailed questions and bigger idea questions, okay? Your detailed questions are going to be questions that point you to a specific place in the text, usually with a line number, okay? So it's going to tell you exactly where to go to find the answer, and you're going to need to go there and focus in on that one point in the text. The bigger idea questions are going to be things like main idea. What is the main idea of this paragraph? Or what is the main idea of the entire passage? What is the tone? Right? They were really big on author's tone. Things like that, okay? Where you can still find evidence, but it's not maybe pointing you to a specific single moment. You don't have to. Here's what I do not want you to do. I do not want you to do the third grade strategy. And this is something we all learned when we were starting to take TCAP way back in the third grade, okay? And it's the read the questions first so that you know what to look for when you're reading the passage. Have you guys done that one before? Heard that one? Okay. It's great in the third grade because you're getting questions like, what is the dog's name? And where are they going? And then the first sentence of the passage is, we took my dog Jack to the park. Okay, I can do that. My brain can handle that. But the questions that you're getting on this test are so high level, they are complex, they are pointing you to specific moments in the text. They're giving you line numbers. And then it's a complex passage. Your brain cannot remember 10 complex questions while also analyzing a complex passage. It's your brain's not built for that. So don't do that. I don't like it. What I do like, is it's a little trickier with the computer, but I think we can make it work. I like doing it on paper, but go to the questions that give you line numbers first, okay? And either on your scratch paper, write those line numbers down, or if you can highlight or do whatever you need to do in the passage, highlight those line numbers, okay? So then you're gonna go back to your passage, and you're just gonna start reading. And I do encourage you to read the whole passage, even if you're just skimming quickly, because you are gonna be asked questions about the passage as a whole, and because some of those questions are not gonna give you line numbers, and you're gonna need to know where to go. So as you're reading, when you get to a highlighted portion or to one of the line numbers that you've noted, you're gonna stop and answer that question now. So instead of reading a whole passage, and then doing a detailed question and having to reorient yourself and what was going on here and what was this about, I don't remember. Just do it in the moment, okay? You're reading it, you're in that moment, you know exactly what the context is, so go ahead and answer it then. What I liked about this is ideally, when you get done reading the passage, you already have 4 or 5 questions answered, okay? I just really like that. But what you've also done that I really like is you have forced yourself to actively read the passage. You've had to force yourself to think about it and process it and analyze it. And yes, they were about specific details, but when you do that, your brain understands the organization of the passage a lot better than if you just read it without doing any kind of active thinking about it. So that when you go to those big idea questions that are left, it is a lot easier and faster for you to find answers and find evidence for those answers because you have a deeper understanding of the organization of the passage. You don't have to spend so much time searching for where did I read that, I don't remember, because you just remember more, okay? So that's the strategy that I like, is do your detailed questions first, and then whatever big idea questions are remaining, do those after you've read the passage and answered all those detailed questions. When you get an A and B passage, what you're going to do is read passage A, then stop and answer all passage A questions. Then go back and read passage B, then answer all passage B questions, and then finish up with questions about both of them. Don't read them both back to back and then try to answer questions, because they're going to be on the same topic. It might be 2 passages that have opposing viewpoints. It might be one passage is just a generic overview of the topic, and then the other one is a specific take on it. But regardless, they're going to be similar, and you don't want to start answering questions and not have an idea of, oh wait, which one was that again? I don't remember which passage that was. You can confuse information really easily that way. All right, tips and tricks. When you're reading these passages, take note of dates and names and places and items are listed in a series. What should we have here, 11:20 or 11:40?
20.
20? Oh, I had that all wrong. Okay, we're gonna do this fast. Those are things that you're likely to have questions about. Make sure that you pay attention to the voice and the tone and the narrative timeline of the narrative. They're not exciting stories. Usually it's just a bunch of people thinking about things, like this one cold rainy day I sat on a bench and thought to myself, like that's what it is. Many of them that I have seen had a flashback in them, a break in the narrative timeline, and if that happens, I can almost guarantee you are going to get a question that asks you which of the following came first in the timeline. And what's going to happen is so many of us are going to go straight to the beginning of the passage and go, wait, which thing happened first? But what it's actually asking you is, did you catch that there was a flashback which happened before this thing started? So if you see a flashback, know that you're probably getting a question about it. Every single answer on this test can be supported with textual evidence. There's just no way around it. If you can't prove an answer, or if you can't decide what the answer is, try to prove it with textual evidence. Every single answer, whether it's a detailed question or a big idea question, you should be able to have textual evidence for it. That being said, if you're stuck between questions, or stuck between answers, if you can't prove it with evidence, then it's probably not the right answer, okay? So use that as a trick too. If you're stuck, find the evidence. Questions about reading? All right, we're gonna go through science very quickly. All right, a lot of times students will say that science is their hardest passage because of whatever reason. By the time we get to it, our brains are kind of mushy. But I think a lot of it too is that the science passage isn't even exactly what we think it's gonna be. So it is the last one, it's 35 minutes, it's 40 questions. You're seeing somewhere between 5 and 7 passages. And what the science test is going to do is it's going to ask you to do critical thinking and read passages and solve some puzzles and look at graphs and tables and piece all this information together. But what it does not do is test your knowledge of scientific facts. So this isn't like a biology test where you've had to read the textbook or you've had to learn things like spit out facts. That's not what this is. Okay? And I think a lot of people, like for me, myself, I was not a science kid in school. And so going into the science test, I was like, this is just obviously going to be my worst because science is my worst subject. But that's not what this is at all. It's just a reading test with graphs and tables and pictures. That's all it is. So what I really like to do is take the questions to build my understanding of what's going on. So when I open a science passage, I'll have some writing, I'll typically have a table or a graph, or all sorts of other things. And if I'm trying to read it all at once and try to process it and understand it, it can be very overwhelming and very difficult, okay? But if I use the questions to help build my understanding one piece at a time, then I'm building it one piece at a time, and one piece is a lot easier than having to read an entire page of information. Your first questions are going to tell you exactly where to go, and that you can start to then understand what's going on through the questions, okay? So I'll give you an example. Let's skip here. Okay, I'm also about to embarrass myself in front of a bunch of science teachers, so just think fondly of me, y'all. Okay, number 8. If another trial had been performed in experiment 2, if I go to a passage and I just go straight to the questions, all I have to do is experiment 2. Oh, look, there's experiment 2. Okay, and 450 liquids. Okay, I know that this is milliliters. It doesn't matter. Okay, unless they're asking you to convert something, it doesn't matter. So don't get bogged down in the details. They're going to give you the Latin names of insects, or they're going to give you units of measurements or things like that, and it doesn't matter. You just need to know that there's an insect. You just need to know that there's some liquid. So I have 450 liquids, okay? In this cylinder, the temperature of the Diet Cola in this trial would most likely have been what? So I'm doing another trial, and I'm doing 450 liquids. If I look at my volume column, where is 450 falling in this column? I'm hearing murmurs, but yes, it's going to fall down here very, very quickly. Okay, so 450 is going to fall down here at the bottom. They want to know what is the temperature going to be that corresponds with that. Well, if I look at my temperature column, it's a range, least to greatest. So my temperature is going to be, is it going to be higher or less than 60? Higher. Hey, look. Greater than 60 degrees. There you go. I don't even know what this passage is about. I've not read it, but I can read a table. It tells me experiment 2, go to this point, what's the I can do these questions. And now I understand a piece about how this table works, okay? If I go to my next question. Okay, so we're repeating trial 6. Okay, here's trial 6 right here. And they have a bottle of Diet Coke that's been opened and left on the counter for 12 hours. If I open a bottle of Diet Coke and leave it on the counter for 12 hours, what is happening? It's going flat, okay? So, they want to know, is it going to have more CO2? CO2 is, you know, the gas that goes psh when you open Diet Coke, okay? Am I going to have more psh or less psh, okay? So the first time we left it closed, opened it, and I had this